There is a moment, early in the morning before full waking, when the mind is still soft enough to notice things it will spend the rest of the day being too busy to attend to. A moment in which the thoughts that have not yet been organized into the day's agenda surface briefly before the agenda arrives and organizes them back into the categories that the day requires. A moment in which questions that the ordinary momentum of an ordinary life does not leave room for can be briefly present before the ordinary momentum resumes. In this moment, for a growing number of people across a growing range of cultures and a growing range of circumstances, the first action of the day is not prayer, is not the ancient, practiced, embodied turning of the consciousness toward the divine that constituted, for the vast majority of human beings who have ever lived, the primary orienting act of the waking day. It is not the quiet moment of gratitude to a creator whose existence organized the meaning of the life being resumed. It is not the recitation of words received from a tradition whose accumulated wisdom about the nature of human existence had been refined through thousands of years of practice and preserved through thousands of years of transmission. The first action is the reaching for the device, the checking of the stream, the immediate, reflexive, almost involuntary consultation of the algorithmic systems that have organized, through the night that the person was not attending to them, the information that the waking person will encounter first. The news that the algorithm has determined is most likely to produce the specific quality of emotional engagement that keeps the person attending to the platform. The social updates that the algorithm has ranked in the order most likely to produce the specific quality of social activation that brings the person back to the platform. The recommendations, the notifications, the continuously refreshed stream of algorithmically curated content that the waking person will begin their day inside, rather than inside the silence that the prayer tradition required and that the algorithm has now replaced. Yuval Noah Harari has observed this replacement with the specific combination of historical precision and philosophical seriousness that makes his observation something considerably more than the familiar complaint about technology addiction that the popular discourse produces in abundance. He is not lamenting the decline of religious practice as a cultural conservative who values the tradition for its tradition. He is identifying something more specific and more consequential than the decline of any particular tradition. He is identifying the emergence of a new religion. Not a religion in the metaphorical sense of the word, not a religion in the loose sense of the intense devotion that human beings sometimes bring to secular pursuits. A religion in the structural sense. A system that performs in the lives of the people who have oriented themselves around it. The specific functions that religion has always performed in the lives of human beings who have oriented themselves around it. The functions of providing the framework within which experience is interpreted, of providing the authority to which questions about how to live are addressed, of providing the community of the like-minded whose shared practices and shared beliefs constitute the social world within which the individual life finds its location and its meaning, of providing the comfort of knowing that the decisions most important to one's existence are being guided by a wisdom greater than one's own, of providing the specific quality of surrender, of entrusting the direction of significant dimensions of one's life to an intelligence that one believes to be wiser than one's own, that the religious relationship with the divine has always offered to the human beings who sought it. These functions are not being performed in the new religion by any personal God. They are being performed by algorithms. To understand why Harari makes this claim, and why he makes it with the seriousness he does, rather than as the provocative rhetorical flourish that it might initially appear to be, requires understanding something about the specific character of what religion has always been and what it has always done in human life. Not the theological content of any specific religious tradition, the structural function, the specific role that the religion, whatever its specific beliefs and practices, plays in the organization of the experience of the people who inhabit it. Religion, in Harari's framework, is first and most fundamentally a system of meaning, a comprehensive account of the nature of reality that locates the individual human life within a context larger than itself and thereby provides the individual life with a significance that it cannot generate entirely from its own resources. The religious story tells the person who they are in relation to the cosmos, why the cosmos exists, why the person exists within it, what the person's existence is for, what the person owes to the forces that created and sustain the cosmos. What happens to the person after the biological process that constitutes their existence concludes, and how the person should conduct themselves in each specific domain of their life in accordance with the requirements of the reality that the religious story describes. This meaning system is not merely an intellectual framework that the religious person chooses from among available alternatives on the basis of its rational superiority. It is the medium of their experience, the lens through which they perceive and interpret the events of their life, the framework within which their emotional responses to those events are organized and given their specific character, the context within which their relationships are embedded and their obligations are defined, the source of the specific quality of ultimate significance that makes the temporary and the local dimensions of the individual life feel genuinely connected to something permanent and universal, rather than merely occurring in the absence of any such connection. Religion is also a system of authority, an account of where the answers to the most important questions about how to live are located and how they are accessed, and what gives them the standing to be the answers rather than merely the suggestions of the particular tradition from which they emerge. In most religious systems, this authority has been located in the divine, in the revealed will of a God who has communicated the requirements of a good human life through prophets or scriptures, or the accumulated wisdom of a tradition whose development has been guided by divine inspiration. The authority of the religious guidance on how to live has derived from its connection to something beyond the merely human, something that transcends the limitation and the partiality and the fallibility of any individual human judgment, and provides through its transcendence the specific quality of unconditional authority that genuinely authoritative guidance requires. Religion is also a system of community. The shared beliefs, the shared practices, the shared rituals, the shared calendar of observance and celebration and mourning that constitute the social life of a religious community create a specific quality of belonging. Not the belonging of people who happen to share a geographic space or an economic interest or a professional identity. The belonging of people who share the deepest available account of what the universe is and what human life is for, who orient themselves around the same ultimate reality, who understand their obligations to each other through the same framework of shared belief, who are connected at the deepest level at which human beings can be connected by the common relationship to a source of meaning and authority that transcends any of them individually and that constitutes the ground of their connection to each other. And religion is a system of surrender, of the specific disposition toward the ultimate authority that the religious tradition describes as faith. The willingness to entrust the direction of significant dimensions of one's life to a wisdom that one believes to be greater than one's own. To pray, which is to bring one's concerns and one's uncertainties and one's needs before the divine intelligence and to wait in whatever form the tradition prescribes for the guidance that the divine intelligence provides. To accept the outcomes of this surrender as reflecting a wisdom that the individual human mind cannot fully comprehend, but that can be trusted because the nature of the divine makes its trustworthiness unconditional. These four functions, meaning authority, community, and surrender, are the structural core of what religion has always done in human life. And Harari's claim is that these four functions are now being performed for a growing number of people in the contemporary world, not by any system of belief in the divine, but by the algorithmic systems that have become the primary medium through which those people navigate the most significant dimensions of their daily existence. Consider the function of meaning first. The algorithm provides, for the person who has organized their primary social and informational life around the digital platforms, a continuous stream of interpreted reality, not raw information. Curated, ranked, contextualized information that arrives already shaped by the algorithm's assessment of what is important, what is relevant, what deserves attention, and what can be safely ignored. The person who begins their day with the platform's feed does not encounter reality directly, they encounter the algorithm's presentation of reality, the algorithm's version of what is happening, what matters, who is succeeding, who is failing, what the dominant emotional register of the moment should be, what the person should be angry about or excited about or concerned about or grateful for. This is a meaning function. Not as rich or as philosophically sophisticated as the meaning function that the great religious traditions have provided through their comprehensive accounts of the nature of the cosmos and the purpose of human existence, but structurally analogous in the specific sense of providing the person with an organized interpretation of their experience rather than leaving them to encounter reality in the unorganized, unranked, uncontextualized form that reality presents to a consciousness without the guidance of an interpretive framework. The algorithm tells the person what is significant, what is relevant to them, what the significant things mean, what the appropriate response to them is, not through theological propositions, through the specific design of what is surfaced and what is buried, what is amplified and what is silenced, what is presented as urgent and what is presented as ignorable in the continuous stream of content that the algorithm manages on the person's behalf. The authority function is even more strikingly replicated in the algorithmic relationship. The contemporary person consults the algorithm for guidance on how to live in a range and with a regularity that has no precedent outside of the religious relationship with the divine. What to eat, guided by the nutritional tracking algorithm that monitors the person's intake and provides real-time assessment of its adequacy relative to the person's health goals. What to watch, guided by the recommendation algorithm that has analyzed the person's viewing history with sufficient comprehensiveness to predict, more accurately than the person can predict for themselves, which of the available options will produce the most positive engagement response. Where to go, guided by the navigation algorithm that knows not only the optimal route but the person's movement history, their usual destinations, their preferred arrival times, the variations in their patterns across the days of the week and the seasons of the year, who to spend time with, guided by the social platform's understanding of the person's interaction history and the prediction of which social connections will produce the most satisfying engagement. How to sleep, guided by the sleep tracking algorithm. How to exercise, guided by the fitness algorithm. How to manage time, guided by the scheduling algorithm. In each of these domains, the person is relating to the algorithm in precisely the way that the religious person relates to divine guidance. Not simply as a tool whose recommendations can be accepted or rejected on the basis of the person's own independent assessment, as an authority, as a source of wisdom that the person's own judgment is not adequate to match, as something to be consulted rather than simply used, as something whose guidance the person defers to, not because they have been coerced into deference, but because they have genuinely concluded, on the basis of the algorithm's demonstrated track record of knowing things about them that they did not know about themselves, that the algorithm's judgment in these domains is more reliable than their own. This is surrender. The specific disposition of the religious relationship that Harari identifies as its most personally consequential and most psychologically profound dimension. The willingness to entrust the direction of significant dimensions of one's life to a wisdom that one believes to be greater than one's own. The religious person prays and waits for guidance. The contemporary person queries the algorithm and accepts its recommendation. The structural relationship is the same. The source of the authority being surrendered to is categorically different. But the psychological disposition, the specific quality of trust in a greater intelligence that makes the surrender feel appropriate rather than abdicating, is functionally identical. The community function is perhaps the most visible of the algorithmic religion's functional replications. The digital platforms have created communities of shared belief and shared practice and shared identity that perform, for their members, the specific social functions that religious communities have historically performed. The community of people who share the same algorithmic environment, who are exposed to the same content, who have been shaped by the same platform's specific design toward the same emotional responses and the same informational priorities and the same social norms, constitutes a community of shared meaning in the structural sense of the term. Not the theological content of a religious community's shared meaning, but the functional equivalent, a shared world, a shared account of what is important and what is negligible, what is right and what is wrong, who is admirable and who is contemptible, what the present moment of history means and what its urgency requires. Harari identifies something specifically religious in the way that membership in these algorithmic communities is maintained and enforced. The shared practices of posting and engaging and sharing and commenting constitute the observances of the platform religion. The specific norms of the community, the content that is celebrated and amplified, the content that is condemned and suppressed, the specific emotional registers that are rewarded, and the ones that are punished through the mechanism of the engagement metrics that constitute the social feedback system of the platform, function as the moral code of the community in the structural sense that the moral codes of religious communities have always functioned. As the system of norms whose observance maintains membership in good standing and whose violation risks the specific form of social exclusion that is the primary sanction available to any community for the management of the behavior of its members. The departure from religious community, the leaving of the church or the mosque or the synagogue or the temple, has always been experienced as one of the most socially and personally costly acts available to a member of a religious community, precisely because the community provides the social world within which the member's identity and belonging are constituted. Leaving means not merely changing one's beliefs. It means losing the community within which those beliefs were the common ground of every relationship. The contemporary equivalent, the departure from the platform or the algorithmic community, produces recognizably similar costs. The loss of the social world constituted by the platform, the loss of the relationships that exist primarily within it, the loss of the specific quality of belonging that the shared algorithmic environment provides. Costs that are real enough and felt strongly enough that many people who are aware of what the platform is doing to them continue to use it rather than bear the specific social cost of departure. The historical context within which Harari locates this analysis is essential to understanding why he treats it as a development of genuine civilizational significance rather than simply an interesting observation about contemporary digital culture. For the entirety of recorded human history, the competition between religious systems for the organization of human meaning, authority, community, and surrender has been the primary dynamic driving the most significant cultural and political transformations of every era. The transition from polytheism to monotheism in the ancient Mediterranean, the spread of Buddhism across Asia, the rise of Islam and its rapid transformation of the political and cultural landscape of the Middle East and beyond, the Protestant Reformation and its shattering of the Catholic Church's monopoly on religious authority in Western Europe, the rise of secular ideologies in the 19th and 20th centuries that replicated the structural functions of religion within a framework that replaced the divine with historical forces or racial destiny or the workers' revolution. In each of these transitions, what changed was not simply what people believed. What changed was the system through which meaning was provided. Authority was constituted, community was organized, and surrender was directed. The specific content of the new system was, in each case, radically different from the content of the system it replaced. But the structural functions that the new system performed were the same functions that the old system had performed. Because those functions are not contingent on any specific theological content. They are the functions that any large-scale human social organization requires in order to maintain the coherence and the direction and the shared sense of purpose that large-scale human social organization depends on. The emergence of the algorithmic systems as the primary providers of these functions for a growing portion of the contemporary world's population is, in this historical perspective, not a development outside the familiar category of religious transformation. It is the latest instance of the most consistently significant category of civilizational change. The replacement of one system of meaning, authority, community, and surrender with another. not the elimination of the need for those functions, the installation of a new provider for them. The theological content of the new religion is worth examining with the same seriousness that Harari brings to the examination of previous religious systems. Because the algorithmic religion does have a theology, not in the explicit form of a doctrine that its adherents consciously affirm, in the implicit form of the assumptions about the nature of reality and the nature of the human being that the system's design embeds in the practices and the orientations of the people who use it. The theology of the algorithmic religion begins with a specific account of what the human being is, a data-generating entity, a system whose preferences, behaviors, desires, fears, social connections, and decision patterns can be captured, analyzed, predicted, and ultimately managed through the processing of the data that the entity generates through its interaction with the world. This is not the theology that any of the major religious traditions has proposed for the nature of the human being. The theological traditions of the world have proposed, in their various forms, accounts of the human being as a soul, a conscious subject, an image of the divine, an entity whose inner life has a depth and a significance that exceeds any possible quantification or external description. The algorithmic theology's account of the human being is incompatible at the most fundamental level with any of these alternatives, not in a deliberate or polemical way. In the quiet, practical, assumption-embedded way of a system whose entire design is organized around the premise that the human being is fully legible to the data analysis that the system performs on the human being's digital traces. The practical implication of this theology for the people who relate to the algorithmic systems as the primary providers of meaning and authority and community